It is yet another night without country roads playing for West Virginia fans for Bob Huggins' team. Now 0-2 in Big 12 conference play with Kansas in front of them. A loss to Oklahoma State on the road, 67-60, and now 10-4 on the season. I'm Mike Asti. I am joined by our basketball beat writer for WVSN, Ethan Bock, as we're going to try to make some sense of things, talk about maybe the real Mountaineers and what's been going on these last couple games compared to the out-of-conference team, and did face some tests against Xavier, and even Purdue has become the best team in the country. But that team and this team doesn't seem to be the same team, how this game unfolded, and what to expect moving forward, as well as some weird controversies from this very odd Monday night after a holiday break for West Virginia. Again, 0-2 now in Big 12 play and 10-4 on the year. And now getting into some must-win games in conference play against the teams you figure to kind of give them as losses, but you don't win these, so now every game becomes that much more important. So, Ethan, to start things off, West Virginia was well out of this game early. I mean, this looked like we were going to do a show and it was going to be lit with West Virginia's embarrassing themselves. Maybe we're fools from earlier in the season. And maybe a lot of the critics that were saying, no, it's the same as last year's team, even though this roster is better and they're more talented, they actually might have been correct. West Virginia got back in the game. At one point, actually had a lead late in the game, but then blew that lead and ended up losing by 7. You see Bob Huggins and Erik Stevenson kind of going at each other. Huggins thinking Erik Stevenson was directing something at someone else, and Marcus Smart was involved, and a lot of former players for both teams are at this game because of the NBA connections there of the Celtics in town. So Joe Mazzulla was even able to watch this team and saw West Virginia be at really their worst. So, simple question: what the hell happened?
Yeah, a lot happened. A lot has happened in the last couple of days with this West Virginia team. Seems like a totally different team from non-conference play.
Yeah.
Seems like the offense has lost majority of these games now. Guys are just standing around. Seems like they just run down the shot clock, throw up a shot, or if they even get to that point, they turn the ball over. I do think West Virginia's second half against Oklahoma State was probably their best half in a little bit. It limited the turnovers a little bit. Guys hit shots. Trey Mitchell had a few big baskets in the second half. Erik Stevenson had 3 threes in 90 seconds before ending up fouling out. So
it
there was
felt
a sign.
like maybe they were going to be able to kind of steal a game they didn't play well in. It almost felt like they were going to somehow get it, and then we would be having a different conversation. But it didn't.
Yeah, they look like their usual self there for a couple minutes, and then Erik Stevenson fouls out, and then Huggs has to throw in Emmett Matthews with 4 fouls. He's got to play careful, but they need him in, get a basket. Right. Just wasn't enough. Another game where the Mountaineers struggle on the road in Big 12 play.
Yeah, and on the road, I guess you could chalk it up to being on the road. Obviously, that's going to be tougher than being at home. And as Huggins always says, the calls are not going to go our way on the road in Big 12 play, but we cannot use that as an excuse. And West Virginia also had their share of free throws, missing those, including late in the game. You mentioned they turned it on in the second half, but that also included missing free throws. You mentioned Trey Mitchell hitting some big threes. He also missed a couple. And even on the broadcast, they talked about that maybe even after strong defensive possessions, because you could argue, despite not winning this game, not playing well in most of this game, and the offense, which was great earlier in the season to our surprise, not showing up in most of this game, it might be one of the better defensive efforts for the team, which sucks to lose that way. But they would take a strong defensive possession and then would have players out of position. And even though Trey Mitchell is a good three-point shooter, he's a catch and shoot shooter, not somebody who's just going to run up and down the court and create his own shot. And that's what kind of they forced him to do a couple possessions. It seemed like they drew it up for that to occur, which was weird. So again, it just didn't work out, but they bit themselves in the foot. Is that kind of maybe how you feel right now after this, that we saw how good West Virginia can be against teams like this? We don't know about Kansas, Baylor, and Texas, but these should be equal teams to them in conference play. They were ranked, 48 hours ago. It's not like, even though it was in the previous year. So it's more of they let themselves down versus this is actually the real West Virginia. Like, where are your thoughts on that? Because that's the conversation now. Were we fooled by the out-of-conference team, and this is the real West Virginia that's not much better record-wise than last year with a better roster? Or are they still better and have shown it at times, but for some reason it's not showing up in the last two games enough to get wins?
Yeah, for West Virginia fans, they should be frustrated. The last 48 hours have been terrible.
God, yeah.
I mean, you're on the road, but at the same time, Oklahoma State and Kansas State are also teams that are trying to turn it around as well. Especially after West Virginia played non-conference, even the games they lost, it looked like there was a sign of they could actually win in the Big 12 on the road.
Yeah.
And they still can. West Virginia fans probably aren't as confident as some of the media are, but I'm not too worried about them on the road. Still, it's still really early.
It's still rough to throw an article up on Twitter right now because you're just
Yeah,
met with, as you see, you're just met with the same old Mountaineers, and you want to say, well, actually, the whole starting five is different. Erik Stevenson wasn't on the team last year. They weren't killing teams like they did earlier in the season. They're winning by 25 and 30. The backyard brawl win looks really good now with how Pitt's playing, and they did hang right with Purdue, who's snagging a top ranking. But none of that, I guess, is going to matter if the record's not better. If they win 15 games this year and everyone's going to say, well, they played better, no one's going to care.
Yeah, there's still a couple teams in the conference I think they can go snag a game or two on the road from. That's why I'm not entirely worried. There is concern.
Right.
Because these two teams, their environments really aren't that intimidating. No. Kansas State on New Year's was really just a little student section because they had the Sugar Bowl game hours earlier, and Oklahoma State's crowd wasn't that great either. So that's what I see why people are concerned. It's going to be interesting when they play in a true hostile Big 12 road environment.
The rowdiest Oklahoma State supporter might have been Marcus Smart, to be honest.
Yeah, might have been.
Yeah, Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here at WVU Sports Now. It is a post-game show for us. It is our first 2023 and first loss for the Mountaineers in their first game of the year. But as Ethan put it, it's the last 48 hours have been really, really bad, and that includes both sets of the year. So it's not even like the calendar turned and West Virginia can't play anymore, or it's not even like they had a long break and they couldn't play anymore, because you could use that as an excuse for Kansas State. This is a quick turnaround. They clearly had a lot to work on. I'm sure they worked on it. I'm sure Huggins said you can't sleep through games. You can lose to anybody, even if you're better than them in this conference. They heard it. They believe in him. They listen to him, unlike maybe some teams of recent years, which is what ourselves and our colleagues have also touched on. It felt like the last couple of years, aside from McBride, those players weren't really listening to Huggins as much. This team really wanted to be special for Huggins. Erik Stevenson has said this, that they don't even want to just be good. They want to actually be a great West Virginia team to join the list of great Huggins teams and be part of Huggins documentaries someday. That's not happening if you don't get at least a 500 record in conference play and certainly get in the NCAA tournament. Nothing's locked up at 10-4 the way they're 0-2 now. They could lose to anybody from what we're seeing. I do want to go to the chat here because we are live and kind of get some things cleared up, because we'll get back to the game play in a moment, but when you have a disappointing loss, and Huggins certainly is no stranger to showing frustration, you're going to have a lot of things boil over. So at the end of the game, we got these stories up on WVSN as well. You see Huggins and Erik Stevenson kind of having some words. Huggins saying that he was pointing at Erik Stevenson, not Marcus Smart, because some thought maybe it was going in that direction, which would be odd. It almost seemed like for a while on social media, they thought a Hall of Fame basketball coach of the losing team was trying to get into it with a current NBA player who is actually being coached by his Huggins' former player who was just at the game to watch. It would have, it's almost like it's just bound to happen with Marcus Smart anywhere. But that's kind of where people thought we were going, and that would have been really buck wild. Granted, the national media is busy, obviously, with what's went on in Monday Night Football, and prayers to Damar Hamlin, but that's where we thought we were going here. It doesn't appear we're going there, and Bob Huggins cleared that up, that that's not what was happening. But then I have a question here in the chat that's saying that, yeah, they see the Huggins obviously mad at Stevenson. Any guesses, though, on who was the other player he called out and was mad out as far meaning another West Virginia player. So was there somebody else Huggins is mad at? Why is he mad at Stevenson? Is this a big deal or no deal? Because Stevenson has been the leader of this team that Huggins has relied on as a fifth-year senior all year long. And now he could be in the doghouse. Certainly it's not a good look for the team leader to be into it with the coach after really bad loss. Unpack all of that.
Yeah, Huggins was obviously he was irritated with Erik. Said it cost him the game, and it did. He's not wrong. It did.
Okay.
Oklahoma State went on a run to finish the game after West Virginia finally took the lead. I do think it is a problem. I think Erik Stevenson's the MVP of this team. He's the vocal leader. He is what keeps this team together. I think
he really wants to be the leader too. It's like a vibe that he wants.
He wants to be the leader. That's what makes him great. I think Erik's the best player on this team. I think his impact is huge. He really has, I feel like, gotten everybody in line, and that's from the fifth-year seniors all the way down to the true freshmen.
Right.
So I think it is a big deal because you got to have him on the court at all times. He only played 22 minutes against Kansas State. He fouls out in regulation. They lose in overtime. Tonight, he fouls out with 5 minutes to go, and Oklahoma State goes on a run and wins the game. So Erik's huge to this team. He can't say or do any stupid stuff that costs the team the game, and he did cost the team the game in a way.
Was there anybody else that Huggins was also mad at, separate from Erik Stevenson? Because that seems to be the question here.
He didn't go into any specifics, but he just mentioned that there were powders on the bench again. So.
Okay. Yeah, and it is weird out of all players. And again, it goes back into this fogginess of this 48-hour period. If somebody would have told you a week ago there's going to be a player that Bob Huggins is going to put in the doghouse and basically start blaming losses on because he's kind of losing control of himself, maybe Erik Stevenson would have been a pick just because he's been physical and he made the bully ball comment that I wrote a commentary on. Really, ever since that comment from Erik Stevenson in the commentary I wrote, Erik Stevenson has kind of unraveled. I don't know. I'm assuming Huggins talked to him and told him what he told us, that, hey, we want you to be physical and bully ball is fine, but this isn't the 1980s. The bad boys isn't going to work here, and we're not going to get calls. So if you do this in Big 12 play, we're going to be, the opponent's going to be on the foul line every other possession, and you're going to be out of this game, and we really need you. I'm assuming that talk happened. It didn't get through to him, but I don't know. I would assume that you wouldn't have been able to believe it if someone would have told you a week ago that Erik Stevenson is now costing the team the game when you're arguing he's team MVP. How did it get here with Erik Stevenson? Is it just that he is mentally unraveling? Is this something that maybe was there before? And how can this be put under wraps? Because they just went through a stretch without Emmett Matthews. Those weren't conference games, but I guess the only pushback that they were playing great prior to the conference schedule is, yeah, they were competitive in every game and their losses were good losses. But Huggins touched on this. Some of the wins, they won big, but they only won big because they were more talented. They had really bad moments in some of those games. And the Buffalo game didn't really make you feel good, or Stony Brook either, with how they won. So we've seen a little bit of this. We get into this game, but then it's Stevenson unraveling. Where does Huggins and Stevens go from here?
I think they go their normal way. I don't think this escalates to anything crazy. Huggins loves Erik. Erik loves Huggins. They are right. Erik is Huggins Jr. He's Huggins if he was a player. Like those two are very similar in certain ways.
Right.
And Erik's been like this. This is how he is. This is just who he is, and it's not.
Is it possible though that you can't, because that's the pushback I got from fans, that Huggins is hypocritical because he played that style in the 70s. Is it possible you cannot be the Huggins type of player in today's basketball? That he can't do it.
A point. To a point, I don't think you can really talk as much trash as you could. I don't think you can do you can't do any hand gestures really in general anymore. You can't really talk to the fans, even if it's an NBA player, even
who
if it's
previously talked to fans.
NBA
I mean, the
player.
man was fighting fans, so I mean, it's bizarre that it was him of all people, but yeah, right.
I don't think Huggins is a hypocrite for it, because it's a new era of basketball.
Yeah.
Officiating is so much different. The game's called so much different. There's stuff you can still do, and there's stuff you can't still do, and it's just a different time.
As someone who's covered this team for a while, any concern, I guess, for fans that the MVP of this team is going to get benched for a half against Kansas, or Huggins is going to try to send a message? Because we also know that from Huggins that he is so comfortable with his career, as he should. He's a basketball Hall of Famer, and he's all big on teaching these teams and getting the most out of these players, that obviously Kansas is getting to be a really big game now. They're 0-2 in conference play. It's Kansas. You don't expect to win, but it's at home. It's a winnable game. They played well with them in the past. They've still been competitive this year, and you do not need to get some conference wins. If not Kansas, you got to win the next one. But Huggins might send a message over a must-win situation. Like he's prone to do that if he, depending on how these next few days go with that relationship, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Coach Huggins can't afford to have any in-game punishment.
Right, he can't really. No,
he can't.
Yeah, you can't.
Next two games are against Kansas and Baylor, and one's a top 3 team in the country, another national title contender. And the other one's Baylor, who you can't overlook, even though they're vulnerable at the moment. And then you're also going to have the distraction of bringing back Jalen Bridges to Morgantown. There's going to be the next 2 games over the next week are very important for West Virginia. It's almost a must-win for both, and go 2-2 in the stretch.
Yeah. That's why these games were so big, to at least go 1-1.
Yeah, you can't fall back. You can't fall back 0-2. I know it's road games in the Big 12. There's no easy win. But
can't go 0-4.
You can't go 0-4. Oklahoma State and Kansas State, those were the teams you were going to have to beat rather than having to go out and beat Kansas and Baylor. Now they have to beat both of them.
Right. I have some, I guess, pushback on our thoughts here so far in the chat right now, is we thought this could be the case because you have a bad loss like this. It's gonna be action from fans. They're gonna be disappointed. And again, I do feel a vibe. This is a better team that wants to get better. I also feel a vibe from Erik Stevenson being around him, that he's gonna take what Huggins will finally tell him. He didn't take it against Kansas State, but he'll learn now. And I don't think he'll put Huggins in a position to have to make a decision on benching him and become a cancer the next few days. But there are some actually defending Erik Stevenson altogether, including Mountaineer fans, basically saying now that, he was responding to somebody else mocking a dude, and he only got called for the reputation that he does have prior to West Virginia. And a lot of fans actually are taking the other direction of not blaming Erik Stevenson and saying that, hey, you're just going to react that way, and that Huggins shouldn't be actually as mad at Stevenson as he is. And it's more of just the refs, I guess. Any validity there? Like, do you understand, I guess, where Erik Stevenson is coming from here?
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, Huggins is not going to want to hear it.
I totally see where Erik Stevenson's coming from. And that would be with any player, not just West Virginia, but just any player in general.
Sure.
It's basketball. Yeah. You're going to talk trash to your opponent.
Yeah.
Your opponent's going to talk trash back to you. But I feel like this is a common theme with Erik. Seems like he talks trash to almost every opponent. And I feel like sometimes, I'm not saying he does. I'm not sure. I'm not on the court listening to his conversations, but it sounds like sometimes he's starting the conversation.
Yeah. And it might be like to get it. There are players like this in basketball at all levels. Sometimes they talk to get themselves into a game. Gary Payton, the Hall of Famer, has been one to actually say that if he was not talking, he couldn't play well. Like,
I totally see why this. I see why this would work for Erik. I think he does thrive in going back and forth with the opponent. He's just a competitor. It's just how he is. So I totally see it from his point of view. But just in that situation, when you hit your third 3 in a row in 90 seconds, you give your team the lead for the first time in the game.
Right.
You just can't. You can't do that. You can't do any hand gesture. He could have said something subtly to somebody, and he probably would have gotten away with it. But you just can't. You can't do the hand gestures now. You just can't. Not in today's game.
Right. The example of how Huggins played in the 70s at WVU, or even I mentioned Gary Payton, the Hall of Famer, who mostly played in the 90s, we're 30 years removed. We're 50 plus years removed from Huggins playing. It's just not, you can't do it today. It's not the same game. It's just college basketball too, but it's not going to be dealt with. You're doing it on the road. It's a conference game. Yeah, it just can't happen. And I think also the other end of this is, and I think we're probably on the same page here, I can understand, and emotions do happen, but for this to be Erik Stevenson costing his team a critical game is probably the worst of any player on the team, because he has administered himself as the leader. And while he's done a good job being the leader, And it seems like every player is kind of following his lead, even in press conferences, and Huggins joking that he won't shut up, but it's in a positive way, and clearly giving him sidebars every time he had to communicate something to the team. A lot of the time Huggins would go to Erik first and then have Erik tell the team. Clearly Huggins, within a few games of this season, nobody knew who the leader would be. He picked Erik. Okay, Erik, you want to be the leader? I'm going to make you the leader. But then to have the guy that wants to be the leader, that a Hall of Famer says, okay, you can be the leader, and then he's costing his team the game with just letting himself mentally unravel and kind of fall in the trap of the opponent. He should be the one player that's above this as a fifth-year senior who wants to be the leader.
Yeah, he has to find a balance.
Right.
He is a fifth-year senior, and this group is a veteran group. I feel like every game this team's getting a technical foul, and eventually that's just going to cost them, and it did tonight.
Yeah.
Sometimes these guys, I think this group is a very mature, disciplined team at times, like just in a sense of knowing what environment they're getting into. Obviously, the turnovers are an issue. That's not disciplined at all. But I just think they're a mature group, and Erik's got to find a balance between that competitiveness and costing his team.
How do you, in terms of back to basketball, because you mentioned the turnovers, aside from mentally, how do you clean up the turnovers? Because I could argue that no matter how big West Virginia was winning earlier in the season, and even while they've been rebounding well most of the year, even though Huggins has not always been satisfied, turnovers have kind of always been a thing. Some more games than others, but Huggins talked about this weeks ago. I think they were averaging 14 a game. He's like, that's way too much. You got to double that for conference play. Those words are sounding prophetic. That basically is literally the case. So how do you clean that up? Or are they knee deep in conference play now with the best of the schedule coming up in front of them? And granted, they do have a few days now to get ready, but is it possible to clean all that up? And how do you clean all that up now? We're in January.
It's still possible. I think we're still really early into the season. You look at Kansas, for example. Oklahoma State's up 15 at half. Kansas comes back, steals the game. I feel like Kansas, for example, they do this every beginning of the conference play where they start out slow, and then Bill Self gathers his group, and by February and March they're rolling.
Right.
So I think every team in this conference has something to work on. West Virginia's for sure is the turnover issue, and as of the last two games, it's the free throws. They've been a great free throw shooting team, or I shouldn't say great. They've been a solid to good free throw shooting team throughout this season so far, way better than last year. But the last two games are very last year-esque. And with the turnovers, I just think you have to get the ball in the Joe Toussaint's hands, for example. Kedrian Johnson at times has struggled with controlling the ball, but keep it in Joe and Johnson's hands, and then just get the ball moving around. If you're going to turn it over, at least throw it out of bounds. Don't keep it in play, because then it results in the defense having to catch up, and then the opponent has numbers in advantage. So
yeah,
that's just one way you got to clean it up, is just if you're going to turn over, throw it out of bounds. Don't keep that ball in play to where you're going back on a 3-on-2. So there's ways they can fix it.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're gonna fix something like that, you want a Hall of Fame coach helping you fix it. But it's also, I could see reason why fans may be annoyed with the way they're losing these games, because they're losing because of missing free throws, they're losing because of turnovers, and you do think fundamentals would not be your issue with a veteran team and a Hall of Fame coach. Granted, thanks to the transfer portal, they had to quickly rebuild this team, and they did do it and have built, I still believe, a solid team, but you're not going to have the chemistry, although we're several games into the season now. They don't really have those excuses they would have had maybe, a few games in. We're well into the season at this point here. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti, WV Sports Now. The Mountaineers do drop 0-2 in conference play. They're now 10-4 on the year. 67-60 is the loss here on January 2nd, Monday night, to Oklahoma State. Kansas in front of this team. Now, the only thing I can think of, I just want to get your quick thoughts on this, because you got a good read, obviously, on this team and just being around the team, but even how they active that they still were talking on social media, even during the break when they weren't all together. I know Erik Stevenson dealt with some travel issues, but about Jose Perez, they still are really vocal about free Jose, and he's not there, and they're so much energy is being put there, and I'm certainly right here to say the NCAA is kind of screwing this one up, because Manhattan's getting transfers now onto the team, and the guy has his coach fired 10 days before the season and can't move on, and whether they admit it or not, it seemed like they were trying to block him. So it's all a bunch of funkiness and BS. But any possibility, if this season keeps unraveling, I feel like this might be brought up, and I'm just going to bring it up now. Did this team mentally get out of it because of the loss of that decision, and they're just so focused on being mad at the world, and maybe we're figuring he was going to get on the floor with them, and now they're thinking he's not, so they're down on themselves? Did any of that get in their mind and mentally screw this team up? Because that decision happened, and they've never played as well since prior to that decision, including prior to conference play. They did win a couple of those games, but they were against lesser competition that Huggins admitted they would have just won off their talent, but they didn't really play well. And now they're losing these conference games. If they go ahead and lose by 20 to Kansas, is that not a real conversation?
I think it's a fair point. Yeah, up until the waiver was denied by the NCAA, this team was playing really good. They were easily a top 25 team, and since then, they have not been that same team. Emmett obviously being hurt
Right?
played a huge part in it.
That's
They
fair.
still, like we talked about, they still beat Buffalo and Stony Brook, but they were disappointed with only winning by 10 or 20 points. They should have won by 30 or 40 points on those teams, and that's no knock on them. That's a knock on WVU. So I don't think this team's play really should be affected by Jose Perez's waiver decision. I could see why.
It's a theory. I mean, I'm not saying anyone's on the team or coach has told me that.
I think it's a fair
support that, but
I think it's a fair theory. It could be a huge coincidence, or it could actually be a huge thing. That this team needs Jose right now. They need another scorer on the floor.
They do, yeah. I mean, before it was like it could be a luxury and you feel bad for the kid, but now it feels like a need for the freaking team. Yeah, I mean, that is very true. And again, if they want those theories to shut up, then they got to play better. I mean, you can't guarantee a win against Kansas and Baylor and Texas, but you got to play better and show up. Yeah. Would you classify that as a must win now coming up against Kansas? And really, you hate to say that. I mean, Kansas does get better as the season progresses. We're still in January, not February, end of February, as you mentioned. So West Virginia has been prone to catch them in this game, this early January game at home. This is a vulnerable game for them. But I feel like opponents got to start now salivating to play the Mountaineers because West Virginia is getting desperate. They got to clip off W's. They know what's going on off the court. And maybe, honestly, it might even help to quiet that theory of Huggins to get real old school in these kids and basically be like, look, Erik, every 20 minutes tweeting free Jose is not going to work if we're going to be losing every game and you're going to be fouling out and, missing shots. The vibe around the program is starting to really leave what it was even 2 weeks ago, that he turned this around. The ship is sailing, maybe a dark horse Sweet 16 run. And all of a sudden now it's same old Mountaineers. It's not been that many games in the midst of that period, but they have that one decision that's also been a negative for them. So I don't know if Huggins needs to take these kids off social media. I don't know if you really can do that because they're kids and it's social media era. But is this Kansas game a must win? How many of these games in front of them are must wins? And is it really an environmental situation that maybe is dissipating for this team, or can it can be saved? But where are you, I guess, on the panic meter?
I'm not too entirely worried yet. I'm a little concerned. I'm not gonna lie. I thought for sure, at worst, this team should go 1-1 in this on this little road trip to Kansas State and Oklahoma State. Now you're 0-2. Luckily, you have Kansas at home. At least it's not in Lawrence,
right? That's what I mean. Yeah.
So, but at the same time, you can't start 0-3 and then have to go and play Baylor a couple days later. Like, it is a must win. It's a must win for West Virginia. They definitely have to go 1-1 in this stretch.
They put themselves backs against the wall. I mean, that really sounds unfair to say Kansas is a must win, but I mean, it is.
It's a must win. They play Kansas well in Morgantown as well, so that's why I'll factor it in as a must win. Every game at this point for the rest of the season is going to be a must win. we'll probably talk about that for the next 2 months about how every game's a must win.
Probably.
But in this situation with them starting conference play 0-2, seems like everybody's in the same. Everybody's changed vibe. Everybody went, like you said, from this. Oh, they'll be in the tournament field, potential Sweet 16 team.
Yeah.
Now it's this is the same. This is last year's team all over again.
Yeah. The fun's gone. Basically,
yeah,
it's like not fun.
gone.
WVU Twitter is no longer fun. WVU basketball Twitter is now
the only
no
way they'll
fun
be able to
zone
revive it is if they beat Kansas on Saturday. And
yeah,
honestly, if they beat Baylor on Tuesday as well, I'm not. Obviously, perfect world. If they go 2-0 in that stretch, West Virginia fans will be back on the train. I know they will. I think 1-1.
Yeah, you would figure. Yeah,
1-1 they'll be more comfortable, but they cannot. They absolutely cannot lose the next 2 in a row at home as well.
What do they need to do in terms of the matchup, in terms of those games coming up, in terms of on the floor?
Yeah, I think.
Outside of hitting shots and hitting free throws, etc., and obviously not letting yourself mentally unravel and start gelling with an NBA player, but in terms of what can be fixed on for this team on the floor, outside of what we already talked about, I guess.
Obviously, definitely the turnovers and the free throw shooting. I don't know if it was a road issue with the free throw shooting. They've been a fine free throw shooting team this season. Obviously, the turnovers got to be fixed. They've been bad all year, but now they're really getting exposed for it. It's actually costing them games. They just got to defend home court. I mean, you're bringing in 2 of the 3 best teams in the conference to Morgantown over the next week. You got to defend your home court. They got to hit shots. It seems like the last few games, Kansas State game, they started well shooting from the field, but it seemed like every game in non-conference play, they started 7 of 8 or 8 of 10, really high percentage from the field off from the start.
Yeah, from the start, and these these conference games have been real slow starts. Yeah.
Kansas State they started out with 17-3 run, but they're also still slow. They didn't shoot the ball 80%, 90% from the field. Oklahoma State tonight, they scored 4 points in the first 10 minutes. So that was the first time where this offense really has looked vulnerable. And that was one of their huge strengths so far this season. And that's got to be fixed.
Why did they have possessions that seemed so chaotic? I guess to ask that, like, why did they have so many? And I think this also was a thing that was discussed earlier in the season in out of conference play that Huggins did bring up a little bit, and we discussed even on a past show that it crept up in the Xavier game, because that's one they also wish they would have had back. It's not a bad loss, but it's still a loss that maybe should have been a win, even though they were on the road in a tough place to play, that at the end of games, they would have trouble kind of closing those games or securing sound basketball to the end of this game. I mean, second half, they played well here, but not the last couple minutes. How did that happen? And why are these possessions still getting so chaotic in terms of why do you have a strong defensive position and then it's just a cluster, on the other side, and people are just chucking a 3 2 seconds into the possession? Why are those things happening? I mean, those things you would not think would still be occurring. They didn't bite them before because they had a 30-point lead and they'd win the game by 20 because they're so talented. But you can't do that in conference play. That's how you go from being up by 1 to losing by 7 in a blink of an eye outside of the Stevenson mess. So why are they having chaotic possessions that have been going on all year? But again, a lot of the mistakes that have been going on all year that we've been touching on, but we thought, okay, they're still competitive. They're cleaning things up. They'll get better in conference play. They're still there. They're still creeping up, and they're actually getting worse now against better teams.
Yeah, I think it's the competition level. That's the main thing. They're playing. They like Kansas State and Oklahoma State aren't the best teams they've played all year. I think UAB,
right. Sure.
Xavier,
right.
Purdue, etc. They're all better than Kansas State and Oklahoma State. Those two teams, those two programs are kind of retooling. I just think it really comes down to just assigning roles on offense. I feel like it worked at the beginning of the year when you had Stevenson, Matthews, Mitchell, Toussaint, Keedy. You had like five or six guys that were reliable scorers that could get you 10 points a game. Sometimes one guy like Joe Toussaint would score 18 against Pitt. Right. Just random outbursts of one guy scoring about 20 points a game. But now I feel like guys are a little confused on what their role is on the offensive side, at least. I think defensive side has been the same for the whole year. But on the offensive end, the offense just does not look the same from the first half of the year.
Yeah.
Just looks out of touch. I don't think the ball's moving around enough.
And I mean, again, you haven't had as many practices, of course. This is not the game right after break. This is 2 games after break, but that could excuse maybe the Kansas State game. Not that there should be an excuse, though, for these games, but maybe they haven't been practicing as much. They certainly haven't been gelling as much together. And the weirdest thing about your commentary there that they don't know their positions on offense, that was the concern if Perez was actually put on the team, that would be the only negative, that everybody would have no idea where they actually fall, because now you have a 19-point game score added to the mix. So everyone feels like they're down a pecking order, which would be confusing 12 plus games into a season. But that's happening even without Perez. So again, that maybe goes back to the theory. Like, it's almost like they were getting ready for something and you're so ready and excited, and then it doesn't happen and they can't mentally get back right. But they got to pretty freaking soon, or basically they drop these next 2. I don't even think Perez is secretly even going to be wanting to be on this team, because they'll just be burning his eligibility for going nowhere. Like, he doesn't want to burn eligibility and argue with the NCAA and not even make the NCAA tournament, which right now this team has secured nothing. 10-4, 0-2 in conference play, but they certainly got to get their act together now. I'll ask this kind of as we close up the show. I did see also a tweet from our colleague about Huggins not doing the handshake and kind of running out and refusing to acknowledge the opponent outside of the whole Marcus Smart, Erik Stevenson thing. I didn't listen to Huggins on postgame. Was that asked? Did he bring that up? Is that, you hear anything about that in terms of, is Huggins angry with the officiating that he's now taking it out on the game? Is he mad at the opponent here somehow from what went on? And again, the exchange there with Erik Stevenson. What do you make of any of that?
Yeah, he didn't publicly say anything about not shaking hands with Oklahoma State. I'm sure that'll be addressed later, if it will be. Even I'm not sure if it will be.
Right.
He did have comments about the officiating crew, just kind of in the sense that it has to be called both ways, just coach talk.
Yeah.
But he didn't get into why he didn't shake hands with Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I'd imagine Huggins' press conference, his weekly session there before this next game, is gonna be a can't miss session, because there's be a lot of questions that we're not sure of right now that are going to have to be asked there. And again, I'm not calling anyone a liar. Colleague was there, we're not there, obviously, and if he might have just had a miscue of just forgetting to shake hands because he's dealing with his player and an NBA player and all the other craziness that was going on. It's not like Huggins to intentionally snub somebody, but it was a weird final few minutes. And it was the final few minutes that at one point looked like West Virginia was going to steal a game that they didn't really play well in. But as you know, if they would have won this game despite everything going on, the cloud wouldn't be looming as large. Like, if they just would have got the win somehow, or if they had the Kansas State win to make this game not as important, and then you could chalk this one up as Stevenson kind of mentally unraveling and let's move on. But to lose both and then have Kansas in front, have Baylor in front, have a gauntlet schedule that everybody, even the most optimistic person that covered or roots for West Virginia, was saying, well, they're going to lose some of those games, but they got to at least win enough of the other games in conference play to get enough wins. They'll get in the tournament. Now you got some of those tough games that everybody thought they would drop coming up, and now they're must wins, because they can't go 0-4, 0-5. And if you're losing to Oklahoma State and Kansas State, you could lose to anybody. Certainly if you're playing like this, they can lose to anybody, but they have played better against better teams. I mean, they produced better than these 2 teams, and they played much better with Purdue. If these 2 teams played Xavier in a neutral court, it would be a good game. And they played right there with Xavier, even though they probably should have beat Xavier. So again, you just don't know. But until this team proves themselves, it's going to be same old Mountaineers. And it's not fair to these kids, because some of them weren't even on the team last year. But hey, that's reality. And I'm imagining they're going to play better coming up. And it would be a West Virginia thing to do, though, to lose these 2 and then win the next 2, because then it's going to be in the back of your mind when they're still probably 24th at best, or still a middle seed in the conference tournament, or they're a 6th seed instead of a 3 or 4 they were predicted a week ago, where it's like, well, if you could do this wouldn't be an issue if that means you should have been able to beat those other teams. Like, they still have that in them. But
yeah,
Yeah.
Backs against the wall, but they
They
have to answer the call.
Yeah.
Like you said, it would be very West Virginia of them to beat Kansas and Baylor back to back now.
Yeah, I would.
I wouldn't be shocked I really wouldn't be shocked if they upset Kansas or Baylor. I also wouldn't be surprised with a loss to both teams either. So, but yeah, backs against the wall. They're 0-2 in conference play. People have the same vibe from last season. They got to win the fans over back again.
Yeah, yeah, they do. And whether they care about that or not, because I guess that's not really relevant or important, they got to just get these wins for themselves and for the team and for the season, because it did look like it could go places, but it doesn't really feel like that as much right now. And I think Huggins is probably telling Erik Stevenson and this whole team, I don't care what's going on with the opponent. I don't care what they're saying. I don't care what Marcus Smart's saying. He's already in the NBA with his money. He don't got to worry about college basketball anymore. We just can't, we just can't have it. You gotta rise above and you got to find a way to get victories, even on the road in tough places to play. Certainly if you're the better team, although I guess they weren't favored going into this because of the Kansas State game. So this is not technically a odds makers upset, but it's going to be rough. You have must-win games against a historic powerhouse, the contender for national title every season, and a recent national champion, with all the drama, as you mentioned, of Bridges returning. To have imagine going in that 0-3 with a must-win, with all that off the court mess. The conversation is going to be off the court. They did this to themselves, but they got a lot of pressure now. But for the cliched phrase, as we will close up this post-game show, as the Mountaineers now are 0-2 in conference play, 10-4 on the year, 67-60 loser to Oklahoma State. It was not good, and it got weirder and worse at the end of the game, even though they did make it a game at one point. No pressure, no diamonds. So they got some pressure. We'll see if they can somehow turn that into diamonds at some point.